Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we're joined by a special guest where we're joined by Patti Temple, founder of Temple Rocks and author of the book, I'm Not Done. Patti, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Well, no, thanks for taking the time out to join us. It's definitely a topic that I'm passionate about, and I've been really excited to have someone on the show just to talk about. So appreciate you reaching out to me in the first place. So thanks for coming on the show. Before we jump in, Patti, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Sure. Well, I've been in the communications business for close to 40 years. And I like to say I've sort of experienced it from every side. So I've been on the agency side, both advertising and PR. I was a client where I was a senior communications executive. And I also did the entrepreneurial thing for about a decade. So I've lived through and been part of all sorts of change. As part of that, I had also seen, and frankly seen before I was paying attention to it, this thing called ageism creeping into many a workplace. And I saw it, I started to see it firsthand and much more closely the higher I reached in organizations. And I would say that my first, opportunity to really witness it came about a decade ago, where I was then Chief Communications Officer for a large Fortune 100 company, and working for a woman who was fantastic and was the first woman who had been named to the executive ranks at this company. But I started to notice that she was being, I would say, less impactful than usual, only because she was not involved as much as usual. She wasn't invited to certain meetings. Her opinion was either not asked for sometimes or discarded. And, there was no reason that I could understand. She hadn't suddenly become less intelligent, in the last few days. But something definitely was going on. And I had the opportunity shortly thereafter. I was at a cocktail reception with our CEO, who was her boss and, my second line boss. And he had put her in this important job. So I knew he was a fan. So I just said, tell me what is going on. I call her Angelina in my book. I said, tell me what's going on with Angelina. I can tell something's not right. How can I help her? And his first reaction was to let me know that perhaps that would be good for me if she were no longer in her position, which I thought was in a way flattering, but in a way incredibly disconcerting.
Yeah.
But then it was the second thing he said that really put me back on my heels a little bit, which was, he said, and I think she's just tired.
Whoa.
And I knew she wasn't tired. I didn't know at the time, to be honest, that tired was a euphemism for, in many ways, how we describe older workers, but I just knew it wasn't true. And so I think that was the beginning of when my passive observation of things that might be defined or described as ageist became much more active. And I just started paying a lot closer attention. So what was interesting to me as I look back on it was my initial reaction was very self-preservation oriented. I thought, I am going to make sure that nobody ever says I'm tired and that I'm not surprised by any of these things. And I'm going to plan for my sort of second career. My second act is a term that you hear a lot. And so I bought books. There were lots of books about sort of reinventing yourself. Maybe it's time to go open that boutique on the beach that you've, always fantasized about doing. And at the time I was reading all those things thinking, I should think about this, or I should think about that. But what I didn't think about was that perhaps when it did happen to me, and it did, I wasn't going to be ready to open a boutique on the beach. I was still feeling vibrant and, important, and had things that I wanted to contribute and things that I wanted to do. So that's really when I decided, when that happened to me and I felt as though I'd been sort of marginalized a bit, I decided to leave my job. I was lucky enough that I could to do that without another job, and really think about what I wanted to do next. And what I ultimately decided to do next was write and talk about this, because nobody, in my opinion, myself included, should be put in a position where they're not working as long as they want, as long as they are capably providing value to an employer. So this kind of became my thing.
Just going back to the beginning, thank you so much for sharing that, by the way. It must be quite hard to unsee that after you kind of notice that, because then it's just always on your mind. It must be. I'm only assuming, by the way. There's this you're conscious of that all the time. And I'm just wondering, what were the signs, if you don't mind sharing, that you felt that was happening towards you? What were those triggers that you were like, okay, now I'm being put in that, that box?
Well, in my particular situation, I don't think there were any signs. And so I think that's what made it particularly difficult and jarring for me. For some, I think there are signs where all of us, as I said about my friend Angelina, you're not invited to
quite obvious ones. Yeah.
Or, somebody sort of talks over your head, or there's also frequently just sort of a general avoidance. I've had people who were put in that position tell me, I just started feeling invisible at work. And I think that, all of those are subtle signs of ageism, but they also could be subtle signs that you might mistake for just, did I do something wrong? Does my boss not like me anymore? So that's why ageism, I think, is so hard to sort of define and say out loud.
Sure.
Because it is very subtle and often unconscious. But I think that if, and another common thing that I heard from a lot of people was, like in my case, I was moved into a different job that just didn't feel substantive. Every other job I'd had felt really substantive. And I knew it wasn't because my performance had been not good, because I'd had consistent bonuses and performance reviews and all the rest of that. So one of the things that others have told me is that the same thing, that all of a sudden they're asked to do something that just doesn't feel sort of commensurate with their experience and the kinds of roles that they've been asked to play in the past.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that, because looking back, I actually saw the same thing, and I don't know if this definitely doesn't compare, but as a young leader, when I first became manager, I was 18.
Sure.
And I actually had it from the opposite perspective, where I wasn't invited to the meetings. I was excluded because I was too young.
No, it's an ageism, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm focusing my efforts on ageism as it relates to older workers, but the legal definition of ageism is both ways. And I also think, and I can't say this often enough because I feel so strongly, like my personal career and my life has been blessed by the younger people that I've worked with. And as a younger person, by the older people that I've worked with. So this is anything but a zero-sum game. If the only way that we could achieve a workplace that's representative of older workers was by not hiring younger workers, that would be a tragedy. That's not the answer. The answer is to grow our organizations and reach a place where we can have a diverse and inclusive workforce, but one that includes people of all ages. That's the secret sauce.
In all honesty as well, and you think about the level of the amount of the knowledge and experience that exists in the older generation of workforce as well is incredible. You want that to be passed on as well to the new generations coming. It's so valuable. You've invested so much in those individuals. To then put them in positions almost as like a placeholder, let's say, because you feel that they don't have the energy or desire or passion to innovate and push beyond and take the business to where it needs to be, seems crazy.
No, I think it is. And, it would be easy and fair to assume that I have a vested interest in this. As a 50, I'm 59. But one of the people that I quote and interviewed in my book is, a early 40s person, and she happens to be in the agency business, which is going through the communications agency business, just tremendous change and disruption. And her feedback, or her point in my interview, was that where are the people that have been through this kind of disruptive change, because I need their help right now. I would benefit from their wisdom, their guidance, their perspective, and I'm just seeing most of them for cost reasons in many cases, but being sort of pushed out of the organizations. And I feel, and she's incredibly talented, but she said, I feel like I'm left to solve this on my own. And I really miss having more seasoned people around that I can
That's
gain.
a very good point. Those people have been through those multiple changes in the years in the organizations. They have the skills and knowledge and experience and know how to adapt and evolve. So where did you get to the point where you're like, I'm going to write this book? Right? Because I thought that's always an interesting question. And also, what's the structure of the book? What can people learn from the book? Give us an overview.
Sure. Well, it started, as I said, I left my job without another job, which was the first time in my life I'd ever done that. So there was a bit of, risk associated with that. But I had been given some really good advice about take some time to sort of process and think about what you want to do next. And so one of the things that I decided to do was write a blog. And I had written a lot. That was part of my as a communications person, writing is part of something that I've always had to do. And I used to write things for my staff, but I'd never written something to put out in the universe, so to speak. At the time, I think I had 22 followers on my, website. So I didn't really expect that it was going to see a lot of traction, but it did. And basically what I wrote about was my own personal experience and how, I ended up coming to the place where I felt 100% certain that while I may not know exactly what I want to do next, I'm not done. And so #I'm not done. And I put it out on LinkedIn and Facebook and some of my social channels. And it just got such a strong response that I thought, I think I'm onto something here, and there were two things that especially that people responded to. And one was that I did not position my leaving of my job as a happy thing necessarily. It was not, while yes, ultimately it was my choice. It was only my choice because I didn't feel as valued as I wanted to feel in my workplace. And so I think there were a lot of people in my age group who just were surprised by my honesty, because at my age, I could have positioned it like, a choice and a retirement, and I'm going to, do different things, but I chose to be really honest about it. But then what was most, overwhelming in many respects was how many people responded to, I'm not done. I'm not done either. This happened to me. And then people just started reaching out to me with their stories and their appreciation for the fact that I was saying it out loud. And, people flattered me by saying, you're inspiring me, keep doing this. And then it literally kind of became a very purpose-driven thing for me. And I thought, I do have to keep doing this and keep talking about it. And especially as it relates, I decided to be very clear and specific that I was talking about ageism at work, not as a societal, issue as much as just what it feels like to be a career person and then, kind of going through this.
We spoke about before the show as well, and you sent some notes over in terms of HR's role in this. And what role can HR play to help improve this in organizations and maybe help leaders be aware of those unconscious biases, if that's what they are, etc.
As I started thinking about the book, in spite of the fact that most of the people that I was hearing from were people who had experienced ageism, I made a conscious decision that I was just going to have a chapter about that, and that the rest of the book was going to be more focused on finding solutions, about helping professionals really understand the problem. So while I've had a lot of people, I think, are enjoying the book based on the feedback I'm getting, who are sort of living it and experiencing it, and are not necessarily, managing directors or CEOs or heads of HR. That's what I wrote the book for, though, is those kinds of people, because I believe I'm an eternal optimist. And I believe that part of the problem with ageism is that we haven't been talking about it. It hasn't been part of the discussion, and a lot of the bias that's out there is unconscious. And so I believe that once it's exposed and talked about, it can be fixed, and we can truly, in a relatively short period of time, see marked differences in how people feel at the end of their career. I've always said, a glorious career deserves a glorious ending. And far too many people describe the exact opposite, that it just
goes
feels
down,
like,
yeah.
all of a sudden, and I know in my own case, I was very focused on my career as a young, ambitious career person and read books and spent time. And it's like, we should spend that amount of time and planning the end of our career. But the key operative word in that is that we need to be part of planning the end of your career. And if it just sort of happens to you, all of that control is taken away. And back to your question about HR, I just think that that HR people can get their leaders to think about it if they're not already thinking about it. And it's a staggeringly low percentage of CEOs who say that ageism is part of their diversity and inclusion strategy. So, I've worked with some awesome HR partners over my career, and those kinds of people can bring it to their CEOs and their leaders and say, we need to think about this. We need to talk about this and figure out and make sure that we're doing something well. And I also think HR can train people how to have, it's a challenging conversation to have. I get that. I understand that. But I think HR people can help us figure out the right ways to have those conversations so that they're had on a regular basis. So it's not this awkward end of career thing where, frankly, a lot of people are afraid to say anything because they're afraid they'll get sued or, which is kind of a silly fear, but I think it exists.
Yeah. Well, not saying anything has much more of a negative impact, right?
For sure.
I think people have to realize that. And that's for most of these conversations, it's tough to have them, but if you don't have them, it's a lot worse as well, not to have the conversation.
No, I was just gonna say one of the HR professionals that I quoted in my book has a pretty simple answer for how that conversation can be less awkward, and that is to have it all the time. Yeah. And if you if you start talking to someone when they're 35 about, let's talk about your next 5 years, and you have that conversation every year as part of an annual check-in, then all of a sudden they're 55 and you're having the conversation about, let's have that next 5-year conversation. It doesn't feel threatening that all of a sudden I'm 55 and you're talking to me about my next 5 years. No, you've been talking to people like this all the time.
When you're doing the research within the book, then what are some of the practical examples that you share and some of the solutions to help leaders deal with this?
I did find some good examples out there. There aren't enough of them, but I did find some companies who I think are doing things really well. And in fact, I devoted a whole chapter primarily to one company called Herman Miller, which is a furniture manufacturer here in the US. And they, and what I love about their story is that it was as much in their interest as a company as it was in the interest of their employees. But what they discovered was that, like most companies, because of the sheer size of the baby boomer population, they had a disproportionate number of employees who could legally be eligible for retirement, in a certain time frame. And they realized that if for some reason everybody opted to do that, they would have a labor shortage, and they would have even more striking than a labor shortage is they would have a knowledge gap, and they would really have some difficulties. At the same time, they were also noticing, and this is their, talented HR professionals that were noticing, that sometimes people were choosing, in fact, most times people were choosing not to say that they were retiring until right before they wanted to retire, because they were afraid
of saying no, because they weren't getting opportunities.
And so then for many of those people, the transition wasn't smooth, and they weren't financially prepared, or so it ended up being, kind of bad for the company, bad for the individual. So they instituted a program where anybody, it has to be initiated by the employee, but anybody can ask for a phased retirement plan, which allowed for a much smoother transition for the company. They also could involve the person who was leaving in the onboarding and training of the new, of whatever their replacement strategy was. And it also made it easier on the person who was leaving because they had more time to prepare. And in some cases, they would find a different opportunity for the person that made sense. They might say, I'd like to retire in 2 years, and I'd like to, cut back my days in the office, or do different things. And again, any of these requests or choices have to be as good for the company as they are for the individual. But in Herman Miller's case, they found that they were, and it created, they of course did all the metrics, and they found that the managers of the people thought it was useful, and the people who chose to take it thought it was helpful. So I think that's just a great example to me of bringing it out from the shadows, having open conversations, making it not, something. Most HR people told me that the feeling that people have when they come to them with a request to retire is not joyful as much as I
Should
just sort of
be.
feel, yeah, and it should be, but as much as people sort of feeling like, I sort of feel like this is what I'm supposed to do now, and I'm not, being asked to do some of these things. And so it's not as pleasant a conversation as it should be, but in part because nobody thinks they can have it early. You think if you have it early, that means, okay, well, forget my bonus or forget getting offered an opportunity to do something new. I'm just going to kind of sit here and not grow for the last year of my career. Nobody wants it.
How unfortunate is that?
It's very unfortunate.
To work your whole career and to then have that negative stigmatism attached to the end of like, you should be excited about your retirement and be, celebrating it with your organization and have a plan, and people should know as well. And it shouldn't be, seen as a negative as well. And it's what a great program they put together, because I could see multiple, and I guarantee you that they had an increase in performance out of those individuals.
Exactly.
And that there was a more of a positive culture around it as well. And this, that's great that they have that. What are some of the other examples that you share in the book?
Well, I think so. Sometimes it's just cultural as well. It was interesting. I just happened about this one, not doing any research, but I happened to sit on the board of a bank, a regional bank here. And in a board meeting one time, we were talking about the performance of one of our divisions, which happened to be the wealth management group. And they talked about their highest performer named Jackie. And I said, oh, that's great. I'd love to meet Jackie one day. And they said, yeah, that's great. You're going to love her. She's 82. And I said, she's what? She's 82. And so I did meet with Jackie, wanting to talk to her about the book at the time and feeling like surely she has some examples that she will be able to share with me about ageism in her career. And she kind of didn't, and she had worked for more than one bank, but she said, well, and I could tell that she knew that was my focus. And so I think she felt disappointed because she wasn't able to offer me, sort of a story to tell my book. She's like, wait, I think I know something. I can think of something that's happened here. And she said, my boss is always asking me if I'm sure I want to travel this much. Can I really travel this much? And I said, okay, that's compassion, not ageism. That's okay. They are staying close to you. They are understanding. They're not telling you that they don't want you to do this job. That's great. And she's in wealth management. So most of her clients are, presumably in their, 40s, 50s, et cetera, because they've accumulated enough money to be managed. And so they have a great level of confidence in somebody, that's been around a while. And it was interesting because then, I don't know, 6 months later, maybe I was, same bank, and I was talking to somebody in their customer service department, and they have 3 employees who are all over 75. And she said, sometimes we have to, I spend a little extra time training them on some of the technology that we use in the call center, but they are so helpful at helping me train my younger people about patience and how to deal with difficult customers and different things. And so, and why I love that story, I think, is because it was just who they were. It wasn't training or let's make a commitment to have an age diverse employee population. They were just doing what was right for their customers. And it turned out that what was right for their customers was a really positive employee, way to work with employees, and yielded a very diverse population of said employees.
I had an older woman on my team. I don't want to say the name in case she gets upset at me. And I found it very difficult to manage her because I was, I think I was 23 and she was late 50s. And that's something that I've really struggled with as a 23-year-old, having to manage, someone who's basically, like, at the time I would relate them to like my mum. I would have loved an organization that would have supported me as a leader and a manager to help train me of how to manage employees.
You're making me think of 2 different points. And one of them is back to where HR professionals can help. Age training is rarely included in diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion training is very common now, but it is, all of the HR people that I talked to said they almost never see it as part of that. But the second thought I had is, again, same, I'm now coming back to the same example, but the woman who got the job to lead the customer service center at the time was, I think she said she was like early 30s. And she almost told them after the first day, I don't think I can do this, because she was managing, again, people that were like her grandparents' age, and she said, I just think it's not for me. Like, it's going to be too awkward. And she showed me a letter. He's since passed away, but she showed me a letter from one of the older workers that she supervised. And he basically, I can't remember the context exactly, but he basically said, I just want you to know, I appreciate you. You have a lot of promise, and you're one of the best young managers that I've seen walk through these doors. And she, obviously it made her feel good. It also immediately set her at ease. And, for those of us that are fighting, and want to be able to stay into the workforce as long as we want to, we have to know that we're going to work for younger bosses. And so I believe that, back to our earlier conversation, ageism can cut both ways. And as somebody that is working for a boss that could be 20, 15, 20, even 30 years our junior, we have to be comfortable with that. And we have to make sure, and I think it's always smart to sort of imagine what their life is like, and imagine that they may be in a position to have to scold somebody that is their mother's age, or provide feedback. And so I think it's also incumbent on those of us that are staying in the workforce to be equally respectful of younger bosses.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to bring up, because I personally, that was just one example, but because I was so young when I started my career at 17, I always had employees that were much older than me. And that was actually normal. I was always the youngest person, which, even though I was a manager, which is quite strange as well. But I never had any type of training on how to deal and how to deal with that. It was just like, just learn as I go and make mistakes and learn from them, and understand that this is going to be part of my own journey and discovery of a leader, and how I'm going to have to adapt to the situation.
A few companies, it's not very widespread at this point, but there are some companies that are choosing to have generational affinity groups. And so you are, there's a lot of emphasis and interest in how to manage the millennial and how to work with the millennials, and the millennials are so different, et cetera, et cetera. And, the best person to ask how to manage a millennial is a boomer, because we've raised millennials, many of us. I always joke, I've had millennials in my basement, for they started out as little kids. I sort of understand that group. And so I think what is the best practice for sure for companies is having not a separate boomer group or a separate millennial group, but bringing the generations together and, talking about the very issues that you were dealing with as a young professional. How helpful would it have been for you to be in a group where you could literally ask people in the demographic that you were trying to figure out, or your peers?
Did you do any research around the hiring process? Because obviously that's an area where a lot of biggest challenges for a lot of the aging workforce who want to get into new roles.
There are now, discrimination laws in place, and people are paying attention to that. There's been several lawsuits where algorithms were determined to just sort of weed people out who graduated from university at a certain point in time. But there are euphemisms. And so what a lot of companies, and I interviewed recruiters about this, and some people who had experienced on their own, trying to find a job and what it's like. And I think that it's for sure out there. It is very difficult, which is one of the things that makes ageism so insidious, because if you are sort of marginalized or pushed out of your job when you're, in your 50s, the only thing worse than that is going to be trying to find a new job, when you're at that age.
That's what everyone's really worried about, leaving their job at those ages, because they're scared they're not going to get another job. I think that's something I hear quite often.
Yeah. And so, companies will say, like the recruiters I talk to, and I say, no company is going to say outright, I want somebody this age. But what they will say are things like, I want ascending talent. I want someone, whose star is rising. Or I want a digital native, which that's my favorite because it's so common. And basically a digital native means somebody young enough to have grown up
with technology.
With technology, and so, there are ways of doing that. And, specifically, I remember talking to one of the recruiters. I said, well, what about someone who's had that experience and whose star has ascended, are there any valuable, or how would you present that person as a great candidate for a job? And she said, they are a great candidate for the job in many cases, but organizations are just much more comfortable knowing how to incent and reward somebody who is growing and potentially looking for the next promotion or the next opportunity. And, one of my favorite examples came too late for me to include in my book, but he's actually a friend of mine, and he had worked in sports marketing for a major organization for a very long time, and was feeling the thing that everybody feels, and sort of less valued, wasn't getting some of the promotions, and just sort of felt like any day now this is going to happen to me. And he ended up getting a job offer from the National Hockey League, who said, if we can just get you for 3 years, your knowledge of contracts and your relationships and your ability to negotiate, we'll take it. And so it was just a refreshing way of looking at somebody who's in his 50s. And, and it's fair to say to somebody that's hiring somebody, if you're hiring somebody in your 50s, you're not looking at a 20-year shelf life, probably. Again, not to presume when people are going to want to leave. But so you just have to look at it differently. But I thought it was really, forward thinking for them to realize that what they would get out of my friend in 3 years would be, would take somebody else a long time to sort of figure out how to do and build up those contacts. So I think that's an example of something too that companies can and should do, is think differently and out, the proverbial out of the box thinking about how they might work with somebody who's on, in the latter part of their career as opposed to the beginning part of their career, and even create opportunities or think differently. I had a woman who was the chief creative officer at an ad agency tell me that she, there's certain, and again, money's real. I get it. Like there's certain roles that as people in the old traditional way of your salary just going up and up and up every year, you can be priced out of a role. Like it may be that it isn't cost effective anymore to send somebody who's making a certain amount of money on as on the ground producer, for example, for a television commercial. But she realized that what they were doing was sort of unconsciously pushing these people into roles that they weren't set up to be successful necessarily, or out the door. And so she said, I created a production ombudsman role for somebody. He doesn't travel anymore because my clients aren't going to pay for it, but I spread his cost out among 10 clients. And when the producer who's on the ground runs into a problem that they don't know how to solve because they're 30, and not because they're not smart, they just haven't experienced it before, they call my guy and he says, did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? And I've saved, in the long run, a ton of money because we're able to solve the problem on the ground faster because of my ombudsman role that I created for this senior guy, because I didn't want to lose him. So I'd love to see more of that creative use of...
Yeah, why wouldn't you do that? It's just, and that's what we're saying. The amount of knowledge and experience that's exiting our organizations is just crazy, especially when you think about the amount of time and resources and the money really that's been, put into developing those individuals. But it goes back to what you said earlier, that you have to have those conversations early and often. Exactly. In order for that to be effective. You can't just have that wait until you get to that moment. Everyone does it. You wait until you get to that awkward moment and then you have the conversation.
Right.
And it's a surprise. It's the same when people were, as a manager, when I was managing, my low performers, I don't wait until the very last moment to then say, oh, by the way, this is not going to work out. You manage it early and often for a long period and work with those individuals to help them on that journey. And if it does come to the time where, it doesn't work out, then they also understand too. And then there's no longer an emotional decision, or you don't leave with any, it doesn't leave in a bad way as well.
Right.
Yeah. I see it all the time as well. And the funny thing is, you're talking about unconscious bias, by the way. I've been interviewing a lot of chief diversity officers over the last few weeks. They're still going to be published over the next few days. And none of them mention this.
Really?
Not one.
I mean, I'm not
By the way,
surprised,
not one.
except the companies that you told me that you work with are some pretty important, big blue chip
They
companies.
are. They really are.
And so I would have hoped they were, perhaps.
They talk about all of. Maybe I didn't ask the question, so I can't really put it in there, but they focus on the ones that the ones that are in the media right now, if I want to say it that way, or the ones the ones that are popular. And that sounds really bad for me to say that, but the ones that are hitting headlines.
And I think that's actually a big part of the problem. I mean, one of the things that I wrote about is, if the part of the challenge of ageism is that those who are affected are far too silent. And so there's reasons for that. One, it's embarrassing. There is still a societal stigma that treats getting older like it's a problem, when in reality, it's sort of something that we're all going to do. And so if you think about okay, I feel marginalized, I'm being pushed out of the organization, I'm 55, but maybe it's just this happens, and maybe I have missed a step here or there, and I'm close to the end. I'm just going to let it go because I don't want to make a big deal. Maybe they'll hire me back as a consultant. Okay, let's have that same conversation. Now I'm 40, and the reason that I'm feeling maligned in the organization is because I'm African American. Nobody would say that's okay. Least of all, the person feeling the discrimination. We have now, as a society, rightful indignation about bias when it comes to, most every other protected class out there.
Yeah.
But when it comes to somebody who is feeling less than because of their age, the person themselves sometimes doesn't say it. So that's, in part, I can't blame the organization for not noticing.
Sure, as I said, they don't know. They don't
know.
Yeah.
But I have an example from my own experience. When I turned 55, I was in the agency business, and I thought that would be a really great time to get my first tattoo. So I got a tattoo, come to the office. I was working around with the creative department. I show, all these people, look, isn't my tattoo cool? I got it for my big birthday. Yes, it's cool. Well, it's like a game of, that old fashioned game of telephone where the message gets changed as it gets told to other people.
Yeah.
So as people were then coming to, see my tattoo, it was like, oh, I didn't know you were 50. Congratulations on your 50th birthday. Happy birthday. Because I had only said it was like a big birthday. I didn't declare which it was.
Oh, so they just assumed it was like a 50th.
Immediately, sort of retreating into, okay, it's not a good thing to be old around in this industry. It's not a good thing to be old in the first place. How lucky am I that they think I'm 50, not 55? And in hindsight, I would, and this again, I was in the agency business at the time, so there was a lot of 20-somethings in the world, in my world. And they would not have judged me more harshly. They would have just understood a little bit better that, 55 is cool too.
Yeah.
And so I really regret that I didn't say, no, I'm 55, and sort of wear my age proudly and help the young people that worked with me to understand that, I'm no different than who I was when you thought I was 50. I'm just 55,
It must have been quite a lot tougher in the agency industry as well, where creativity seems to be, and maybe I'm wrong, was it more difficult in that industry? In the creative industry, do you think, than others?
I think there's more bias. I think that from my experience, but also interviewing people, I think that the creative industry, the agency community, and marketing in general, but it's worse on the agency side, and tech are the two.
They assume you're not up to date with the latest trends, etc. Right. Culture. That's what I meant by that. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. And I actually specifically asked some of the creative leaders that I talked to about that. And, it would be wrong to assume that if I'm a male, I can't come up with a good creative idea about a woman. Because I think really good creatives are able to sort of get outside of themselves, get to the insight about the target and come up with great ideas. But it's also fair to say that if you are, marketing a product that might appeal to boomers more than millennials, chances are your agency's creative department is full of millennials. And so they are just going to be missing sort of some of that life experience that comes from helping people. So again, the best solution for that is an easy one, and that is to just the diverse the diversity of your staff should mirror the diversity of the population. And specifically when it comes to marketing, the diversity of that team should represent the diversity of people that you're trying to market to.
Yeah, because it's with that diverse thought that you get the innovation, right? You get
Exactly.
perspectives. You're not all just singing the same song together.
Right.
You need that. And yeah. Well, look,
Sure.
Patti, this has been an amazing conversation. I'd love to continue it. I think we have to do part 2 for everyone.
I love talking about it.
I really appreciate you taking the time on, and I also almost feel like I'm so happy you messaged me, because for a long time now I've done over 100 episodes, and the fact that we haven't even talked on this topic as well is crazy in my mind, and the fact that not one guest over the 100 episodes brought it up, which is quite shocking when you really think about it. It kind of reflects what we've been talking about.
And I just want to make one point that I didn't make, because I think it's just super important. And that is that this isn't an entitlement thing. So if I thought for a second that what I was trying to do was guarantee that every person, in their 50s or 60s would have a job for as long as they wanted without having to be good.
I know, no one's thinking that, Patti, don't worry.
Yeah, you gotta be good at your job.
Of course, that goes without saying for everyone listening. I'm glad you made that point anyway for anyone that did think that, but I doubt very much anyone did.
Yeah.
It's about, people that are deserving and that they're in that role, and they're great. They're fantastic what they do, and they shouldn't be defined by their age, right?
Right. Exactly.
And both old and young, We're seeing it a lot now with these young CEOs of these big tech startups, and everyone's giving them a lot of grief, saying, how can a 20-year-old run a $1 billion organization? but it's happening all around us, right? So
yeah.
They have the right skill set and they're willing to do it, and we should give them the opportunity and not work against them. Before we part ways, Patti, where can our listeners learn more about? Where can they get a copy of the book? Where's the best place?
Yep, Amazon is the best place, and it's in Amazon marketplaces all around the world. So Amazon.com, and the name of the book is I'm Not Done. And that is also the name of my website. But the difference is it's imnotdone.rocks, just like my last name, ROCKS. I also do have a website where I'm posting a lot of this Patti Temple Rocks, my name, PattiTempleRocks.com. And I love to hear from people. And I think the more stories I hear from people who've experienced it, the more when HR people and people who are running businesses, when we get together and talk about it, the better our solutions are going to be.
Yeah. And I know one of the things that you're passionate about at the moment is going into these organizations, right? And to speak with a HR team and to learn more, right? Is that so? For everyone listening, guys, please reach out to Patti. She'd love to come to you guys and speak to you and the team and work with you. And I think you guys would be crazy not to take her up on that offer.
I totally believe this is an unconscious bias, that people are not, out to get old people. So I think that once we help people understand it and share some of the solutions, we can make this better.
Fantastic. Well, Patti, thank you for taking the time out to join us. Really appreciate it. Guys, as always, if you head over to hrdealers.com, all of the show notes on the episode will be there. The links to everything that Patti just mentioned will be in the resources, so you can find that there. So don't worry. Patti, thank you again for taking the time. And I look forward to following you, and I look forward to seeing the reaction to the book. And hopefully we can speak again soon, okay?
All right, great. Thanks so much, Chris.